Pretty much everyone has some surface-level understanding of how ad-supported businesses work. Instead of selling directly to the consumer, you sell the consumer's attention to the advertisers. But once you understand how this business model was created and what happened immediately after that, you will understand why it's responsible for so many problems of the current state of content. As for why I'm talking about this, I happen to work in the marketing industry, but I personally care a lot about the quality of the content we consume and where we pay our attention. So when did our attention start being monetized on a mass scale and what were the consequences? It all started in 1800s with a magazine titled New York Sun. This doesn't mean that advertising in general didn't exist much earlier, it's just that this magazine was the first ad-supported business, so a business that monetizes the consumer's attention, or to be precise, uses it as a main source of income. But what's the big deal, right? It's just a newspaper, so what was so innovative about it? Well, back then most newspapers used to cost around 5 or 6 cents, and that was a price tag that most people couldn't afford, or at least they weren't willing to pay so much every single day. And as a result, those 5 and 6 cent newspapers were reserved for experts or for specific industries where staying informed was really important. But then came Benjamin Day with the New York Sun, which costed just 1 cent. He figured out that there is a whole untapped audience of people who couldn't afford the more expensive newspapers, and he came up with an idea that if he can get advertisers to pay the rest, then the newspaper can reach a whole untapped audience. And newspaper ads weren't a new idea back then, it's just that no one else figured out that they can supplement the entire price tag of the newspaper. And turns out that the idea was a huge success. The business model was working and eventually competitors started appearing. And that's when the fight for human attention really started picking up. Because think about it, the advertising business model needs a ton of eyeballs for advertisers to be willing to pay for ads. So you must be able to reach a wide audience. But there is only so much attention to go around. So you need to create the most enticing headline. You must create something that will be much more interesting to the consumer than all of the other options. But the thing is, the headline doesn't necessarily even have to be true. And it for sure doesn't have to be valuable to the consumer. There was a huge thing with a news article that talked about some fantasy creatures on the moon. And that was completely made up, but it didn't matter. People didn't read the newspaper for it to be valuable. After all, the newspaper barely costs anything. So that's also how clickbait started. But the entire problem went much further. The next step was the radio. Most people aren't aware how quickly the radio was adopted. The perspective of buying the radio and then being able to consume the content completely for free was really enticing to people. And eventually, a vast majority of households were using the radio. And what was responsible for the huge mass adoption was the advertising business model, because the radio was supported by advertisers. That's how they could offer free content. And then came TV, which opened up a whole entire avenue of showing your product in action on the screen, and it caused a huge advertising boom. Companies that invested in TV ads were growing like crazy, so that's when the ball really started rolling. And nowadays, we're in the age of social media. And notice the parallel of social media, the TV, and the radio. You reach a mass market by making the content free, or almost free. If you had to pay to use social media, then it wouldn't be as popular. And the whole value of social media comes from them being popular. The more people use social media, the more reason other people have to use social media. And the only way to reach such a mass market for social media to even be possible is by making it an ad-supported business. Making the product and the content free is how you reach the mass audience. But there were two elements of social media that didn't exist before and completely changed the landscape once again. Just like television offered the option to show an image, social media offered tons of data and the ability to keep the consumer on your platform. Now you can both target ads to exactly who you want, and you have tons of data about how to keep them engaged. And the whole thing of keeping you on the platform, which is a huge problem in the modern world, is tied directly to advertising. In a subscription business model, this wouldn't happen. Let's say you pay for YouTube Premium, in which case, no matter how much you actually use YouTube, you pay a set amount each month. So really there is no reason to keep you on the platform. If you pay a subscription, then the only thing important is to keep you satisfied, to deliver you valuable content so that you keep paying for the subscription. But there is no difference whether you watch 1 video or 10 videos. But if you're being monetized through ads, then the platform is incentivized to keep you watching as much as possible, because they're earning money for every single ad that you watch. And not only that, they are also trying to constantly be much better than the competition. Because we in the marketing industry are going to spend most of our budget on the most effective ad placement. If I have $50 and spend it on Facebook, and Facebook would show my ad to 10,000 people, but if I spend it on TikTok and TikTok would show my ad to 5,000 people, then of course I'm going to spend most of my money on Facebook ads. And of course it's a simplified version of how marketing campaigns work, but it's generally true. Now you have several huge companies that are mainly optimizing towards catching your attention. And remember those first newspapers back in the day? The ones I mentioned were 5 or 6 cents. Back then you had to prove that your content is valuable enough to pay for. Now it's completely opposite. First you show people the content and you try to catch their attention as well as you can, and only if you succeed, you get paid. That's how the vast majority of content on the internet works nowadays. And the fight for your attention goes even outside social media platforms. After all, advertising is only natural. Every company, every writer, every creator, and every startup is going to try to promote their business. That's simply a truth of being a creator. Whether you're a writer, an artist, or if you're starting a business, the hardest thing to do nowadays is to catch people's attention. Think about most clothing brands. Most clothing brands leave fulfillment to another company in China, and what their business is really mostly about is marketing the product to you. We live in a world of plenty. There are tons of options to choose from, there are plenty of products. The fulfillment part is not the main problem anymore. The main challenge is marketing. Attention is the most limited resource and you can't really make more of it. Now, if you're feeling anxious about all of this, you're probably wondering, is there a solution? But first, let me mention something positive. The ad-supported business model made a ton of free content available to everyone across the globe. That's the reason why we have so much content available on the internet for free. But I'm also a firm believer in supporting platforms like Wikipedia, which is earning money through donations. Now, as for all of these problems that we face, there is actually some hope. First of all, I've seen a rise in the subscription model. I'm not sure if it's a broad trend or maybe it's only happening in my bubble, but platforms like Patreon, Substack, YouTube Premium, or the option to support a creator on YouTube are appearing and they seem to be becoming more popular. People are also becoming much more aware of how their attention is being manipulated. Some are resigning from social media completely. Many are being much more mindful about how they use it and how they consume content. And in general, people are tired of having ads shoved down their throat. Many people are using adblock or even going offline completely. And honestly, that's what we should keep doing. Pay attention and support the types of content you want to exist. Stay mindful of what you pay your attention to, because remember, your attention is being used as a form of currency. And in many cases, maybe you should ask yourself whether you actually need to be on those platforms, whether you need to consume so much, and quite often going offline can be a much better option. That's the message I will leave you with for today, and see you next time.